Welcome to our little hideaway. Today we're getting away from it all. In fact, you could say we're dropping out. Today we're looking at two films where the characters leave society behind. Welcome to the Film Swap Podcast.
Here is a motion picture film.
Tinsel and spun candy and thrill.
Let's tidy up this tangle of film by putting it on a reel.
Hello, listeners, and welcome to Film Swap. My name is David Seeley, and I'd like to introduce you to my esteemed co-host, a man who often disappears for weeks at a time, but he's back tonight to join us for another topical film discussion. The ecstatic gaucho himself, Jonathan Pritchard Barrett. Jonathan, how are you?
I'm well. Well, I'm wearing rather ragged clothes. I've got holes in my knees and my trousers, and I haven't drunk a glass of water, fresh water, for weeks, but I'm still bearing up somehow.
You look very sunburnt as well, like you've spent a lot of time outdoors.
Exactly. You wouldn't know it was winter in the UK. I've been off.
You never know. You never know. Yeah, even in July, sometimes you might think it's winter in the UK. So, Jonathan, it's the new year. It's 2026. And this is our 50th episode of Film Swap. What do you think about that?
Incredible. Absolutely amazing.
It's pretty exciting to think now that we've amassed a little bit of an interesting back catalog of conversations about films.
Yes.
We've discussed well over 100 films on the podcast now. And are you ready for the next 50?
Absolutely. Let's do it.
Brilliant. Well, tonight we're getting away from it all. Or we're talking about people who are deciding to get. I mean, it's a very tempting idea, isn't it? The idea of I mean, maybe that's just my view, but the idea of just getting away from everyone, just getting away from society with all its troubles and tribulations and stresses and unpleasantness, and it's just nice, the idea of just sort of getting away to a nice, quiet, secluded spot. Maybe take one person with you that you can get on with. Take a few good books and maybe a Walkman with some music on it or something, and just kind of get away from it all.
Yeah, maybe a water filter as well, do you think?
A water filter might be a good idea, or some of them tablets. Yeah, and this topic reminds me a little bit of a film that we talked about last year called Summer with Monica, which was a little bit along the lines of that, of like two young people who just kind of absconded from their responsibilities and just took off and went and sort of gallivanted off in the woods for a few months. But then, of course, it all kind of turned a bit sour, and sort of society kept creeping back in. But tonight, that's kind of the theme of the show, because we are talking about a couple of films that are, in fact, about people who have withdrawn themselves from normal contemporary society and have decided to just pack it all in and move away and seclude themselves. Although in this case, it's quite interesting because these people take other people with them, don't they? And
they're not heading for complete isolation, because they're not just on their own. There's other people involved. Very important, I think.
That's right. Well, it is a very important element of this story, because it's not just a case of, sort of Grizzly Adams going and living out in a secluded shack all by himself and not talking to anyone. This is a case where other people get drawn into this dream of just getting away and building your own little world in your own little society away from everyone else.
Yeah.
And I think it's a quite an intriguing idea. And both of these films, they're very different tonight, but they do kind of explore those themes a little bit. So, Jonathan, your film tonight is from the mid '80s, and it was a bit of a kind of a controversial film at the time when it came out. And it's based on a real life story
Yeah.
about two people who got together and went off and lived on a secluded island by themselves for a year. And it's quite a fascinating story, and it's a really fascinating film as well.
Yeah.
And it's called Castaway.
Yeah.
And then in the second half of the show, we're going to be talking about a more recent film from 2016, starring Viggo Mortensen, and it's called Captain Fantastic. We'll be talking about that
Yeah.
in the second half of the show. So, Jonathan, this is our second time talking about a Nicholas Roeg film.
It is.
The late great Nicholas Roeg, a British
Yeah.
director of great renown, who made some really classic films like The Man Who Fell to Earth and Don't Look Now, and Performance, which was the one that we talked about quite a few years ago now.
Yeah.
And this is a really interesting film, but I think it's a little bit more of an obscure one from him. Do you want to tell the listeners just a little bit more about it, and maybe introduce them a little bit to the story?
Yeah, well, I chose this film because I'm a great Nick Roeg fan, and I did a sort of master's in a sort of digital media type stuff, and my final project was basically a sort of like a examination of Nick Roeg's films, and we created a sort of virtual cinema. And the idea was that different rooms in the cinema had different sort of themes of his films, and but they were the sort of like his key sort of body of work, I guess, is a sort of late 60s, well, starting with Performance, 1968, into the early 80s, or maybe stopping at in 1980 with Bad Timing, or possibly Eureka. I really like Eureka. I think it's about 1984. So around there. Anyway, so this is a sort of slightly later from his classic era, but it sort of fitted the bill and of a Castaway film. I really like Nick Roeg films. It was one I hadn't seen, can you believe it? But it did. But I knew that it was going to sort of fit the bill from knowing a little bit about it. And I do remember in the 80s just hearing about it and sort of reading about it, that it was sort of slightly a scandalous film at the time. And
Mm.
watching it now, I can sort of see why, in a way, it was scandalous, because one of the
Well, it
characters.
wasn't just the film, but it was the original, like, because this was based on a real incident about two people
It was.
who actually did this experiment,
Yes.
and that whole idea sort of drummed up a lot of controversy and a lot of discussions in the sort of British press, because they love a nice scandalous tittillating
They like
story that they can
Unusual
sink their
story,
teeth
yeah.
into.
Exactly. It
Yeah,
is. I guess it's. I mean, it's an unusual story. There's
yeah,
no doubt about that. And basically, this guy Gerald Kingsland, uh, who is sort of, I don't know exactly. He said he was a writer, apparently, but I think, but it seems like his job is at the beginning. It seems like his job is teaching children to swim, but by the end, it turns out he already had a sort of some skills in being a mechanic. So I'm not quite
yeah.
sure. He was a sort of mechanic. He taught. He was a swimming teacher. He was a writer. He was a sort of peculiar character, and he put an advert in Time Out magazine saying he needed a wife, in inverted commas. Writer needs wife, in inverted commas, to spend a year on a desert island. And Lucy Irvin is this young woman who's 25 at the time. She was working at the Inland Revenue, and she basically
Yeah,
saw.
and it should be noted she was significantly younger than him.
Yes, he was
Yeah,
49, I think, and she was
yeah,
25. And so he something like that. And but she basically working in Inland Revenue. I suppose it's like quintessentially boring. And so she said, yeah, anything to get out of here. And she replied, and they met up, and off they went to this island called Tuin Island, which is basically in the Torres Straits, which is the land in between Australia and Papua New Guinea, with lots of little islands there. And it was an uninhabited island. There are inhabited islands, as we later find out, and they were one of the uninhabited ones. It was like basically a mile long, apparently. And the funny thing is, they weren't like sort of Ray Mears or any of these sort of, or, Bear Grylls or anybody with any survival skills whatsoever.
No, not
They just
particularly,
popped
no.
up, and they did not only did they not do any really preparation, they didn't sort of learn how to, I don't look after themselves particularly. They it turns out they'd sort of forgotten key bits of kit. They'd remembered the crate of whiskey, but
Well, quite right, yeah.
but they'd forgotten the iodine tablets to sort of sterilize the water.
Yeah.
So that's one little scene earlier on. I think that's based on the true story. But Nick Roeg actually said his story wasn't meant to be exactly the same as the real story, because he gave him a bit more sort of poetic license. But yeah, they were there for a year. Absolutely terrific film, and yeah, highly recommend it.
It's kind of like it sort of plays out as kind of like a kind of a battle of the sexes kind of story, isn't it?
Yes.
In the sense that this is an older, middle-aged man who takes this young, attractive girl with him to this island,
Yeah.
and then of course they both have very different expectations about what they want to get out of the experience.
Yeah.
And so it begins to their relationship becomes strained, shall we say, and all these things, because they kind of get on quite well at first, but then obviously as they're secluded on this island, they begin to more and more the differences in their personalities and the differences in their expectations begin to wear out. And
Yeah.
plus they have a lot of difficulties, don't they? Like, as you mentioned, they didn't go in particularly well prepared, although he seems quite a resourceful chap. He knows how to do a bit of gardening, and he's,
Yeah.
like you say, he's got some technical ability in terms of making things and designing things and getting things to work.
Yeah.
But they soon run into trouble and sort of starts heading towards starvation and injury and disease and things that start to wear out on them. And then they kind of perpetually keep getting rescued, don't they, by these people who live on other islands in the area, who just happen to sort of stumble upon them and go, "Oh, you look like you need some help there, mate." And because his legs gets infected and things like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And of course, in Nicholas Roeg's style, he uses a lot of like sort of little clever sort of imagery, and sort of juxtaposes different images and stuff in order to convey some of the crisis that the characters are going through. I certainly like the bits when they cut away to because obviously Amanda Donohoe, she's a very attractive young lady in the film, and she spends a fair bit of the film, it should be said, in a state of undress, basically.
Yes. Yep.
As does Oliver Reed, although they sort of cleverly conceal his more private sort of things.
Yeah.
But but then there are certain moments when they're starting to starve to death, and they show the difference between what they actually look like and how they kind of see themselves.
Yes.
And so there's these great moments where they cut away and they actually show that they're just sort of worn down to skin and bone, and
Yeah.
that they're all, they look horrible and dirty and
Yeah.
everything. But then it switches back to these kind of idealized images that they have of themselves. And I think stuff like that just is, again, Nicholas Roeg was a sort of a master filmmaker, and
Yeah.
he really, uses a lot of clever little tools to convey the kind of inner and outer realities of the situation. So I quite liked that about the film quite a bit.
Yeah, yeah, I really like that. I mean, there's, because they say that it's not sort of classic Nick Roeg in the sense that lots of the sort of clever editing that you see in his sort of earlier films isn't there.
Mm.
But there's certainly enough to interest you. And I read one of the articles I read on the BFI website. It said this is one Nick Roeg film that's certainly most. It's the Nick Roeg film that's most ripe for sort of reappraisal. Um, and I think that's
Well,
right.
we're starting that here tonight, aren't we?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's got these two terrific performances as well, and old uh, Oliver Reed is perfect, absolutely perfect for this character, isn't he? I mean, it couldn't have
Yeah,
been.
this is a great later role from him. For
Yeah,
him, as a matter of fact, I think it was kind of one of the last sort of
yeah,
leading role things that he ever did. I think
yeah.
after this, his reputation and his kind of lifestyle sort of took over, and I don't think he really did a lot more after this film
No,
until he sort of reemerged. When what was it called, Gladiator, and things like that. And I remember I actually remember when this film came out, or at least when it was released in North America.
I am.
And he went on the David Letterman show to
Really?
promote the film. And he kind of lost his rag or something basically on the David Letterman show, because David Letterman sort of made some sort of he kind of made some kind of little sort of smart ass kind of comment
Right,
to him, and Oliver Reed took umbrage and sort of basically got into a big huff, and then they broke for a commercial break, and when they
right,
came back, Oliver Reed was gone. He
right,
basically either stormed off, or they told him to leave because he was getting all irate. And I kind of vividly remember that, seeing that at the
right,
time, but I didn't see the film. I haven't seen the film until just recently.
right.
But I do vividly remember that time seeing him on the David Letterman show,
Yeah,
and basically throwing his toys out of the pram.
yeah,
And I remember it was just at that stage in his like where he basically had a reputation as being very unreliable and a little bit of a character.
yeah,
Although it's interesting that I was reading on the Wikipedia page that Amanda Donohoe said that he was a perfect gentleman on the set,
yeah,
very professional, and
yeah,
she said he was clearly an alcoholic, but he didn't misbehave, and he was very, he was professional and came and did his work every day.
yeah.
So it is interesting that the reputation side of him, as opposed to the professional side of him, he did seem to manage to balance that somehow.
Yes, exactly, exactly. Yeah, I read the on the video on the DVD. I didn't get the Blu-ray. I got the DVD. They had a sort of interview with the cinematographer, um,
Mm,
and he said that he basically didn't drink in the week. He got completely pie-eyed on Friday and Saturday, and then
mm,
on Sunday. So he'd turn up sort of late in the morning on Monday morning. But once he'd sort of got through that. They had sort of 4.5 good days out of him.
mm,
And, so yeah, it's but he even looks like this guy Gerald Kingsland. If you sort of
mm,
Google his face, that they sort of dyed his beard orange or red,
mm.
and he looks uncannily like him. Uh, yeah, it's but he's sort of this sort of boorish character you saw on those chat shows, because there was a famous one in the UK as well where he was being really insufferable, and
Yeah,
that sort of I think that sort of slightly did for him over here. So he basically burnt his bridges, and
yeah,
but he that's perfect for this role because he is this sort of pompous, disorganized, randy, and
yes,
angry. The other things I read: angry, lazy, irresponsible, romantic, cruel, sort of, but also, yeah, as you say, resourceful and occasionally quite nice and charming as well. And
yeah.
Yeah, it's really,
Yeah, and it is. It's funny because, like, yeah, like I mentioned about the expectations at the beginning, because the key thing for him is that he wanted to take a young girl, a pretty young girl, with him to this island, and his expectation was that he was going to be off on this island with her, and he was going to, enjoy having his way with her, and that was kind of part of his expectation.
yeah,
And of course, she, being her own independent person, and saying, well, actually, that isn't why I came, and
yeah,
that isn't how necessarily what I want out of this.
yeah,
And so there's that clash immediately because his expectations were he was going to get laid basically, but with this
yeah,
lovely lady, and she wasn't having it,
no,
and then that sort of dynamic plays throughout the film about the relationship changes and grows, and the conflicts that they have around those things.
yes,
And it's interesting to note, reading about this chap, the real life Gerald Kingsland.
yeah,
Apparently, this wasn't the only time he did this sort of thing,
no,
that he was constantly going around trying to engage young ladies to go off and join him on these adventures, and it's quite
yes,
extraordinary. But apparently, he was married multiple times,
yeah,
and it wasn't the last time that he basically tried to essentially hire a young lady to go off and live off somewhere with him.
yeah,
So he basically had this ideal lifestyle in mind, that he was going to just run off somewhere with a young girl and live happily ever after,
yes.
uh, just the two of them, without the rest of the world sort of imposing on this fantasy that he had. So
Yeah, well, he according to on the DVD, they have two versions with with sort of critics talking over it, whatever that's called, commentary, two commentary
yeah,
versions of the film, and I started watching one of them, and there it said he'd done it at least once before this, and then and then he carried on doing it afterwards. I mean, he died in Samoa, and when he died, he was 70 or 69, I think, or 70, and his wife was 27, and he had a child with her. That, and so basically, he never he dropped back in. He carried on being dropped out for the rest of his life, for the next
yeah, yeah.
5 years, just because he going around the South Pacific, sort of working as a mechanic, sort of restore.
Mm,
Sounds like he was sort of restoring outboard engines and sort of
mm,
going between from island to island. Um, yeah, and but Lucy Irvin as well. She sort of carried on being dropped out as well. She went off to
yeah.
the sort of remotest highlands, I think, and then went back to an island in the sort of Samoa or somewhere in the South Pacific with her two of her children, and then and now she lives in Bulgaria, which she says is like a sort of desert island. Lives in a yurt in the sort of out in the middle of nowhere, and
Mm.
yeah, it's extraordinary. I've become fascinated by these people since watching the film. Yeah,
Well, yeah, there was a link to a video that you sent me, while we were preparing for the show, and it had an interview with her. It's like a little sort of short film about her, and I can include that link in the show notes if people are interested in seeing more about her. But she does really seem as someone who very much likes the concept of seclusion and being kind of away from
yeah,
people, and uh, and so obviously the two of them shared that sort of idea, that sort of dream of just sort of not having all the trappings of society and the stresses and strains and things,
yeah,
and just kind of getting away and being on your own.
yeah,
So that was, I guess, the one thing that kind of brought them together. But it's interesting how it was unsustainable, and certainly Oliver Reed's character, he never really found happiness in that whole time on the island
Right.
until he started kind of going and doing those bits of work and working as a mechanic
Yeah.
for other people. And it was almost like that kind of like is how he kind of found purpose and
Yes.
enjoyment. And
Yeah.
so it wasn't being, having this lovely young companion with him and being away from everyone. It was actually in the end that social interaction with other people on the islands and
Yeah.
having some work and something, constructive to do with his time and
Yeah.
something that he was good at and that people appreciated him for. And that was something that kind of kept drawing him back into society, if you will. So I thought that was kind of an interesting sort of thing that I picked up rewatching it again for the show tonight, is the fact that um, in a sense, he didn't find his purpose on the island like he thought,
No.
but he found it in other ways.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. Whereas Lucy, funnily enough, was much more of a sort of solitary person, and she
Yeah.
did sort of find her purpose on the island to an extent, even though she was the one that sort of left at the end
Mm,
of the film, and she sort of leaves him there. Um, but yeah, I love the sort of the dreamy character of the film. There's lots of sort of underwater photography, amazing underwater
mm,
photography, and he's got sort of Rogue's characteristic sort of vibrant colours in there as well. He loves bright
mm,
colours in all his films. You can sort of see these connections to his other films, like there's at the beginning when they're in London. Oliver Reed's house is sort of somewhat like the house in Performance. They've, they're just sort of slightly sort of chaotic and I don't know. There's something about it. I think his son is there, and he sort of slightly reminded me of the little boy in Performance, who sort of occasionally pops up in Ferber's house or Turner's house, sorry, and then you got sort of the themes of nature in Walkabout and all these TVs that are you see at the beginning. There's loads of TVs and radio playing in the background, isn't there? Which
mm.
I mean, that's I guess in a few of his films, especially The Man Who Fell to Earth, where he's sort of sitting there in front of this bank, the Alien, David Bowie in front of this bank of TVs.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's despite being quite unsympathetic at the beginning, you do grow to like him, especially when I guess
Yeah.
when they've both been through this sort of starvation period of starvation, they're both sort of humbled by that to an extent, aren't they? And I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
just die, then they sort of somehow come back, and then it's a bit better after that.
Yeah, the film doesn't go in predictable way either, does it? The
Right.
story doesn't, because you kind of think this is going to be like, oh, it's going to be like a love story, like the two of them go
Yeah,
away on this island, and then they'll end up falling in love,
yeah,
and that's it. But the story isn't like that at all. It's like a real sort of examination of the the challenges of two people putting themselves in that situation, and
yeah,
ultimately two very different people who
exactly.
who then have to navigate their own sort of agendas, if you will, in the relationship, and how they come out of that at the end.
Mm.
So it's really good. And like you say, I mean, I think that's why Oliver Reeve was sort of perfect casting for this as well, because he's someone that even when he's being a bit of a drunkard and a bit wild or a bit sort of grumpy or any of those things, he's still a likable guy. He has
Yeah,
that charisma and that
yeah,
personality that just makes him a likable character, even when he's not being a likable person, if that makes sense.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
So so it's very good, and I mean, I think this film is one of Nicholas Rogue's sort of more obscure films, kind of like Eureka, the one that I think he did just before this,
Yes.
that are films that are maybe not as well known and weren't as well received when they were originally released. But I think they're definitely worth checking out, and they have definitely some of the same qualities as Rogue's more well-known popular films. So
Yeah.
I think people would really enjoy this. And it kind of reminded me too. There's another film that I saw for the first time last year called The Age of Consent, which is a film with James Mason. Helen Mirren is
Okay.
in a very young Helen Mirren. It was sort
Right.
of one of her first big film
Right.
roles, and that has a kind of a similar vibe to it in that James Mason sort of secludes himself. He's like an artist, and he goes and buys himself a little hut on a beach somewhere
Okay.
out on an island and sort of secludes himself. And
Right.
then this young girl comes and sort of, at first she's an intrusion, but then they develop a kind of a relationship, and she kind of becomes his muse. And that, in some ways, that this film kind of reminded me of that film a little bit as well. That they have a very similar kind of vibe to them, although the stories aren't quite the same. Any last thoughts on Castaway?
Really enjoyed it, and I think that these two films go together so well as well. I'd recommend
Mm,
anybody who's thinking of watching Captain Fantastic is a sort of more, recent film, better known, but watch Castaway as well. They go together really, really well if you're going to watch Captain Fantastic. And anybody who's sort of a Rogue fan who hasn't seen it, it is now available on Blu-ray and DVD.
yes, yes, 88 films, but this is just last year. This came out from 88 films here in the UK. And as Jonathan mentioned, this is the Blu-ray, but there's a DVD version as well, depending on what format you use. And it's a beautiful, beautiful transfer, and it's a really interesting film. And this was when this came out. I just picked it up because I was interested in seeing it. I had remembered when it came out and that incident on the David Letterman show. And so when this came out, I was like, oh, I wanted to see that. I'd like to see that. So I picked one up, and it's a really, really, really good film and worth checking out. So
Very.
I'm glad that you picked it tonight. So we have an opportunity to tell people, yeah, go out and check this one out because it's a really, really interesting story, and some really great performances from the two of them, and a very Nicholas Rogue take on this film.
Exactly.
It's very much in the Nicholas Rogue sort of visual style,
Yeah.
and it very much fits into his body of work very comfortably, and I think people should go check it out.
Yeah, and actually, one last thing I'd say is that if you're interested, there is a Desert Island Discs with Lucy Irvin. She's chosen her sort of favorite records and talks about her life. So, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, that's brilliant, and I'll include a link to that little article with the little short film about this lady as well in the show
yeah,
notes, so that people can go and see the real person who the film was based on, and also don't forget to check out our little compact review of the film on Letterbox, because depending on where you live, Letterbox will tell you how you can access this film if you don't want to buy a Blu-ray or a DVD. I would imagine that there'll be some opportunities to stream it on various platforms, so you can look and see where the film's available in your area, so you can check it out.
yes,
So, on that note, I think, Jonathan, I'm going to get on my old school bus and drive out into the middle of the woods somewhere, and maybe take the kids for a mountain climbing expedition, and then we'll be back to talk about our second dropout film, which is the more recent and very wonderful film called Captain Fantastic.
yes.
So right after this very, very short intermission, we will be back to discuss our second film. So stay tuned, folks. We'll see you in a moment.
Hey film nerds, Film Swap is now on Letterboxd. It's where you'll find capsule reviews for every film we've covered on the show, plus themed lists based on each of our episodes, and our essential cinema list featuring the films we think are absolute must-sees. You can explore the themes and dive deeper and even drop your own swaps and suggestions in the comments. Got a perfect pick for one of our themes? Tell us. Follow Film Swap on Letterboxd, hit us with your hot takes and submit your swaps. It's like Criterion Closet, except only more chaotic. Just look for Film Swap Podcast on Letterboxd or use this handy dandy QR code. There's also a link in the comments. Hidden gems, forgotten classics. Follow Film Swap on Letterboxd and let's get nerdy.
And we're back. Welcome back, listeners, and welcome back, Jonathan. It's the second half of our dropout double bill tonight. The first half of the show, we talked about Castaway, not to be confused with the Tom Hanks film, by the way,
right,
which has a very similar title, although it's Cast Away, 2 words, and Castaway is just Castaway.
Yes,
isn't it?
That is.
So there's an important distinction to be made there about the meanings of the 2 titles.
Exactly.
And yeah, you shouldn't confuse. Although the film with Tom Hanks, I like that film. I think that's a good film.
Amazingly.
But it's definitely very much a completely different kettle of fish to Castaway.
Yeah.
Our second film tonight is a more recent film than Castaway, and it is actually very aptly named. I'm not entirely sure what the significance of the title is. Actually, I watched the film again this morning in preparation for the show, and I was thinking afterwards about exactly. I'm not sure I understand why it was called Captain Fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, maybe you or someone else can enlighten me to that, because perhaps I'm just, maybe it's just going over my head or something, and I missed it.
I looked into it actually, and in my research, and from what I can remember, the director, he just liked the name Captain Fantastic, but it turned out that because I guess he's a sort of superhero type guy, the dad. But it turned out, because there's a Elton John album, Captain Fantastic and the Dirt Brown Cowboy, which is one of the sort of.
Sorry, I'm not as big on I'm not as up on my Elton John as probably.
Okay, well, I'm not.
Well, I won't say as I should be.
Right. Yeah. So basically, there is this 1975 Elton John album. It's the last one with his sort of classic band, apparently, and it's got various sort of. It's one of his classic albums, and from the early days, or anyway. But apparently his mum, the director's mum, was a great fan of the album and used to play it quite a lot when he was growing up. But he'd completely forgotten that. And when he told his mum, "Oh, I'm calling this film Captain Fantastic," she went, "Oh, after the record," or something like that.
Right. Okay.
They said, no, what record is it? Oh, well.
Anyway. So perhaps it was subliminal.
Yes, it may have been subliminal, or it was just a coincidence. I'm not sure. But anyway. So I think he just liked the sort of name more than anything else.
Well, it's a great title, and I guess the way I interpret it was that, because Viggo Mortensen's character in this is sort of, I don't know if perfect's the right word, but he's very, very intelligent and resourceful, and he's obviously passing that on to his kids, and it is, you could argue that he is sort of like super heroic in his abilities, if you will, like his abilities to look after himself and in his knowledge and in his wherewithal and stuff. And just for the audience sake, I'll just mention too, because of my flippant sort of about Elton John, I don't dislike Elton John. I don't have anything against Elton John. I quite like some of his music, but I'm just not a fan. I don't know what all his albums are, and I don't
Yeah.
sort of, I'm just kind of familiar with all the stuff they play on the radio.
Yeah.
So if anyone sort of took umbrage to my sort of flippant comment about Elton John, don't no hate mail or anything, please, or no nasty comments or whatever, because I don't have anything against Elton John. He's fine. I'm just not a fan, like a you know. But anyway, so back to the film. The Captain Fantastic is a really great story. I really love this film, and that's why I chose it tonight, because it is on the theme of a dropout. This is a family.
Yeah.
This is a man basically who's got his whole family living out in the middle of the wilderness somewhere. Do you know whereabouts it's set?
From
Where
Western
the
Washington State.
well, okay, so it's in Washington. Okay, so it's like a heavily forested area, and they've just gone out and they've set up shop out in the middle of the wilderness. And they live in a little cabin, and they just grow their own vegetables, and they go out and hunt game for food, and they're completely self-reliant, self-sufficient. And Mortensen's character, I guess he made a pact with his wife that they were going to do this. They were going to just withdraw from society, live out in the wilderness, and just keep to themselves. And he homeschools his kids, and they are all super mega intelligent, aren't they? They're all like just really, really bright, intelligent kids who just have absorbed all this stuff to a quite extraordinary level. And he teaches them all, and he teaches them survival sort of skills.
Yeah.
He, teaches them kind of self-defense, and he takes them out on marches. And I alluded before to the fact that he takes them up on, mountain climbing and all these things to make sure that they are absolutely, totally self-reliant and self-sufficient, and so that they can completely look after themselves.
Yeah.
But as the story progresses, I guess his wife, the mother of all these children, has some mental health issues, and she's ended up being hospitalized.
Yeah.
And at the beginning of the film, they have a tragic sort of circumstance in that the mother commits suicide while in the hospital, and all of a sudden that sets off a chain of events, where this family has to suddenly leave the forest
Yeah.
and go and reintroduce themselves to the rest of the world, to normal society. They set off to go to the funeral, which sets off kind of a chain of events of sort of adventures and misadventures, and then it brings to the fore that despite their self-sufficiency and their hyper intelligence and he's been quite successful in what he's done with this family,
Amazing.
he finds that when they suddenly go back into the sort of the rest of the world, then all of these sort of conflicts emerge and problems, things that perhaps he didn't anticipate, and his ideas and his beliefs and his sort of intransience in this idea of this lifestyle becomes challenged. So so that is basically the premise of the film, and I think it's a really, really interesting story.
Yeah.
About this idea, about this sort of the conflict, which you see it play out a little bit in the first film that we talked about, Castaway, in the fact that the idealized sort of dream of withdrawing from a dysfunctional society and sort of sheltering yourself and learning to become self-sufficient, and sort of withdrawing from that, about just how practical that is in real world terms, and how these people then have to navigate that.
Yeah.
And Viggo Mortensen's character in this really ends up, he's been so sort of focused on this project and this ideal that he suddenly he's confronted with the fact that perhaps he needs to be a little bit more flexible and a little bit accommodating to the real
Yeah.
world. Film.
Yes, I think that's very much it. One of the differences between the first and the second film is the first one is sort of based on a true story, although it's a very dreamy sort of version of that, whereas this one is not. So I was, I mean, this was, I was sort of, if this was real, I'd be in complete awe of this dad.
Yeah.
I mean, he's
Yeah, absolutely. Like literally super dad,
he is
isn't he?
super dad.
Just,
And considering when this
yeah.
film was made, he's 58, which I,
Hmm.
was perhaps even older, but and extraordinary. Like there's, I guess I really, really liked the film, but there's one bit where I'd sort of slightly thought this is just going a little bit too far. They basically he takes them all out climbing, and it's
Yeah.
not like a sort of cliff face where they're just climbing along a side and there's just a few foot for them to sort of fall off or whatever.
No, no. This is like K2 kind of, like this is just like, hardcore, you know, up a sheer,
Yeah,
cliff, like, hundreds and hundreds of feet in the air
exactly.
sort of thing.
Yeah,
And they're all quite separated as well, like sort of all sort of spread out along this rock
yeah,
face and climbing up. And then, of course, one of the kids has an accident,
yeah,
basically.
yeah,
And there's that great moment where he just kind of says, they're kind of shouting at each other across the thing because the kid's hurt his arm,
yeah,
possibly broken
yeah.
it. And he's dangling hundreds of feet up in the air. And there's no way that any of the others could help
No,
him. He's on his
yeah,
own. And he says that. There's no one coming. There's no one coming to help you. You have to just stay calm, work it out.
yeah,
And, you just need to work it out and just sort of, and on the one hand, this is the thing that interests me about this film is because you can't really argue with the guy
no,
because he's totally right. Like you do get into times in your life when you're going to run into a
yeah,
problem and there isn't anyone coming over the hill to rescue
yeah,
you. You're gonna have to sort it out. You're gonna have to figure out what to do.
yeah,
You're gonna have to do it. And he's not wrong,
yeah,
but at the same time, you saying, it's just in this extraordinary situation that he's put these kids into, that he's literally put them in mortal danger.
yeah,
There's so many ways in which that could go
yeah,
wrong. And obviously, he's trained them very well, and they're all very, very intelligent, resourceful,
yeah,
resilient kids, which is fantastic. But at the same time, I mean, you and I are both parents. And I mean, I would never sort of knowingly, willfully put my children in harm's way,
no. And the other,
but this guy
he,
does.
he does, he doesn't mind. He doesn't mind.
He gives them serrated hunting knives for presents
Yeah,
and things.
exactly.
And you're just sort of like, oh my
Yeah.
God.
And he didn't look up the weather forecast when they were. I mean, I didn't. He didn't have any devices to do that. Presumably to sort of
Hmm.
see what the weather was like. Was there going to be lightning? Were they going to be struck by lightning on the side of this cliff?
Yeah, yeah. Quite extraordinary.
Yeah,
And it is true because all through it, like the guy's not wrong. He's never
no,
wrong. And it makes it that because he's obviously incredibly intelligent. He's taught these kids. There's that great scene where he's having the argument. I don't know if it's his deceased wife's sister, brother, or his sister,
his
brother.
sister. I wasn't sure.
Yeah,
One of the things I read it is his sister. Yeah,
yeah, so they have an argument about, she's obviously saying, "Oh, these kids, you need to get them into a real school, and you need to," and so then he just to show her up, he sort of gets her kids, and he says, "Well, tell us about the Bill of Rights," and of course, these are two sort of video game playing, sort of, kids who've been brought up,
yeah,
and they're, maybe not like massively bright. And so they kind of try and explain the Bill of Rights and they don't know what it is, or they kind of say it in a really sort of, in a way that shows they don't really know what they're talking about. And then he calls down his little girl and he says, "Tell us about the Bill of Rights." And she's got it all memorized, and then she can explain it exactly what it means and the importance of it and everything. So he's kind of shows up, his sister-in-law there, but and you can kind of say, well, yeah, he's right. He's obviously taught these kids really well, and they're very smart. And but he's also being a bit of an asshole too, isn't he?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. And that absolutely harrowing moment when he interrupts the funeral, he just decides, oh, that's my cue. I'm going to go up and make a speech now. And it's just absolutely horrifying. So, despite the fact that this guy is fantastic in so many ways,
Yeah.
he's also
Massive pain.
a little bit blinkered.
Yeah.
Yeah, and he's really inconsiderate. And he's really like, and that kind of that moment, the funeral, is the moment when he kind of loses your sympathy then as well too, or at least that's the way I saw
Yeah.
it. Because after that point, you think, oh yeah, this guy's pretty cool, and he's he's speaking the truth, and he's right,
Yeah.
and you can't argue with him, even though he is a little bit sort of blunt.
Yeah.
But that's that turning point at the funeral for me, is that when you think, man, this guy's actually like a real asshole.
Yeah. Well, I mean, one of
And he's,
I guess the bit that really for me was the where he sends his daughter on the top of the roof and she falls off very, very close, that she's just hurt, fractured or whatever, but she could have been paralyzed or something. And then he realized,
yeah.
yeah. I mean, there's always accidents, always happen, and why would you ever do that? That's just daft. And it was just a mad fantasy, sort of living in his dreams in a way.
And imposing them on others, I think, which is the key, where it kind of ties in very nicely with the first film, is that
Yeah.
it's all well and fine, like if you have this ideal and this really strict sort of dogma that you want to live by, and that's great. But when there are other people who are being affected by that, you have to consider,
Yeah.
you have to just be considerate of them and about what they want, or is that what's best for them, or is that going to work for them? And I think that's the real sort of conflict in both of these films, is that realization that it isn't just about you.
Yeah.
And about
Yeah, because they're both. I mean, the adults, the sort of three adults in these films, are all pretty sort of selfish, really, aren't they? I guess.
yeah
And but they're also trying to get to some sort of truth. They're living their truth in a sort of quite a profound way. And
yeah
one of the ways they do this in the first film, they basically, don't wear any clothes because you don't need any clothes, and and funnily enough, there's that nudity in the second film as well, in Captain Fantastic. This is extraordinary scene in the sort of campsite or whatever it is, where one morning there's this sort of elderly couple pottering along to go to the shop or the bathroom or whatever, and there is Viggo Mortensen on the door of his butt, with stark naked.
Yes, in all his glory, just kind of standing there sipping his coffee. Yeah, and this couple are just like totally like shocked,
It's very
which is a real thing. Like I don't know if you've ever noticed this, because it springs to mind. There's a film with one of Patrick Swayze's films that I quite like, because it's just balmy, and it's called Roadhouse.
I know that one.
You must be familiar with that one. Oh, well, it's terrific fun. It's just a ridiculous sort of over the top action film, and it's I really like it a lot. I just think it's a fun movie. But there's this one scene in it where one of his work colleagues comes into his flat and he's naked, and she reacts with this kind of oh my god, like this. and there's other films like that as well. And I just like it. There's this interesting sort of thing that runs through American films about just the way that people react to
Right.
penises. That is just really, like it's like, this the ultimate sort of shock that can happen to someone in an American movie is to see someone's penis.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
but this film has that moment where, well, like you say,
Right.
he's standing in his bus naked, and this couple walks by, and you would think that, that like the most horrible things ever happened to them because this man's naked.
Yeah.
And his reaction is priceless. He just goes, "Everyone's got one, I don't know what the big deal
Well,
is."
that was one of the things I really liked.
So,
What I found really interesting about the first film is that because what's her name, Emma Donohoe, is mostly completely nude for most of the film, but it's
mm,
and she's obviously very good looking, but it's not gratuitous. I mean, it's sort of authentic to the story, but
yeah,
it's also not gratuitous in the sense that it's sort of uh, true to their sort of the truth that they're living in a way, um,
yeah,
but it's also sort of slightly, it's sort of it's a difficult thing to sort of be confronted with in a film in a way. One of the characters never has any clothes on. Yeah,
mm,
that's an interesting thing that I was sort of grappling with, I guess. Yeah, it's funny that, and this one I was wondering, is that, I mean, I guess they were sort of making a point in Captain Fantastic with him with no clothes on, but in a way I thought it was just him, the director having sort of fun, poking fun at the audience, again, as you say, through this sort of
yeah,
nudity.
yeah.
Um,
And it fits in just with his worldview of just sort of like, of all these social constructs that make it a big deal for someone to, to react that way to nudity,
yeah,
and he's, and plus it played in on a joke with one of his youngsters who kept sort of coming to their meals or anything, just a young
yeah,
kid running around naked, and he would be constantly saying, "Oh, get some clothes on, go and put some clothes on,"
yeah.
and then and then he's standing there drinking his coffee in his birthday suit there, and then that little kid says, "Hey,
You don't eat without
go and
clothes
get some clothes on."
on. Yeah, exactly. It's yeah,
Yeah,
but one of the things I found interesting about it is sort of makes, if you're a parent, especially, sort of makes you ask questions about your own sort of parenting. How
yes,
in a sort of truly unvarnished sort of keeping it real type way. Um,
yeah,
as we discussed, it's not quite as real as you might think. How much are we sort of playing silly games to sort of protect our children where we should be a bit more honest, and yeah,
yeah,
really, really interesting. And how many classic books should they have read by the age of 9?
yeah, yeah. It kind of the standard, like the bar is so high with this guy and with his family that, yeah, you do, you can't help but. I mean that's true. Like, I mean that's the one thing about being a parent, which I'm sure you'll agree with me. It's like this constant sort of roller coaster of knowing, not knowing about whether what you're getting right and what you're getting wrong, and
Yeah,
did I handle that situation good, or did I do the right thing there? And that's the kind of thing that you kind of grapple with all the time when you're raising
yeah,
children. And that this film really brings that into focus in a really intelligent
yeah,
way, because it also gives that contrast, you know, about his outlook on our society, because it does sort of, show all these things about the differences between these children and his sister-in-law's family.
mm,
These two kids who play, there's that terrific scene when all the kids are sitting around while these two youngsters play this horrible video
yeah.
game, and they're all just looking at it like,
What?
like absolutely horrified, like, what the hell is
Yeah,
this kind of thing? But it's sort of like that's kind of common currency in our culture now,
yeah,
isn't it? That kids that grow up with this stuff.
Yeah.
So this film's really good at sort of drawing that out about just, just how good is our education system,
Yeah.
and how what are just how what is our culture, and what are our ideals, and what are we teaching people, and what's important and what's not so important. And that this film's really good at playing with those ideas and drawing them out, and sort of, and striking that balance about, I've read some reviews about some more sort of kind of right wing newspapers saying about how wrong his character is, and
Right.
how sort of, how wrong headed he is and all that. I think there was one review that I read where someone described him as so wrong headed. And of course, he's not wrong headed at all. He's right in a lot of
Yeah.
ways, but it's just about being a bit more flexible, and about, you do have to live in the society that you're in, and you do have to get on with other people, and you do have to navigate and compromise in things.
Yeah.
And so his attitude maybe becomes a little bit
Yeah.
unrealistic, and that's what the film's about, is about maybe him coming to that realization, and trying to find a compromise that works.
Yes. And
So
yeah, I think one of the things that I'd listened to, or I think one of the interviews that I saw with Viggo Mortensen on it, he was saying, yeah, one of the sort of themes is sort of communication, for him at least, was the sort of communication, and how this guy is sort of can't really communicate with anybody. Uh, and but he's almost made me think he's almost like a sort of alien who's just sort of landed on Earth, and who are all these people doing these weird things. Um,
yeah,
if you're sort of doing it rationally, you wouldn't do it like this at all. Um, yeah.
no,
But one of but it's not just about ideas. One of the things that's really sweet is just this sort of picture of family love, of this very tightly knit
mm,
and sort of eccentric family, and how they're all accepted for who they are, and they
mm.
love for each other, which I really enjoyed. Really enjoyed that.
Yeah, and it should be like the main protagonist isn't like, he's not so inflexible and so, kind of pig-headed and transient in his ideas, that he doesn't see and realize maybe where he's getting it wrong.
Yes.
And it is that love that he has for his kids, that he's just really trying to do the best for them.
Yes.
And so that kind of plays out. So the film really at its center is a really, heartwarming, but not in a sentimental or sort of, sticky, sort of
Yeah.
sickly kind of way, but like in a really intelligent and thoughtful
Yeah.
way. It's a really heartwarming film, really, quite
Yeah.
moving in towards the end.
Yeah.
And I love the story about the kind of his oldest boy, and those terrific scenes when he meets the
Yeah.
girl. And it's just so like, it's like very funny, and
Definitely.
that, like, what, like that kind of cringe comedy kind of way of like, he's just so unbelievably awkward with this girl.
Yeah.
And that really funny scene where he kind of gets down on his hands and knees and just makes a complete and utter fool of himself in front of this young girl. But it's quite, quite just one of many really terrific little scenes that are, that play out really nicely. And it's just like really wonderful film in so many ways. It's funny, and it's kind of sad, and it's kind of, hopeful and heartwarming and all those
Yeah.
things. So it is really just really terrific piece of
Yeah.
entertainment. You know.
Really, really, really good. And one of the interviews I saw with Matt Ross, the director, he was saying one of the important bits for him is the sort of the ending, and and so basically at the ending, they haven't gone back to their mountain sort of eyrie, have they?
Mm,
They're now
No,
Some well,
but they found kind of a compromise, haven't they? To
exactly.
you know,
I guess they're probably. I was sort of thinking they've gone from hunter gatherer to agriculturalists because they're not sort of hunting deer in the woods anymore. They're growing crops and
no,
fields, um,
yeah,
and but they're sort of it's a it's a happy ending by and large.
yeah. But is it though? Because that last shot is quite striking. I noticed that today when I was watching it this morning. That last scene, if you watch Vito Mortensen in that scene, I don't know why I
Yeah.
keep calling him Vito. Maybe I've been watching a lot of Italian films lately, so maybe that's why. But Viggo Mortensen, his character, if you watch him and watch his face in that last scene,
Oh yeah.
it's quite telling that it sort of suggests that maybe he's not necessarily happy. It isn't necessarily a happy ending for him,
Okay.
but I think overall for the family unit, it's a happy ending.
Right.
But maybe not entirely for him.
Well,
So
interestingly, he's putting them first because with Lucy Irvin in
mm,
this interviews, she said that she when she came back from the island, she had sort of had children, and then she basically as soon as the children were old enough, she said, "Right, I'm off," and then moved to Bulgaria to sort of live on her own again. So maybe
mm,
as soon as the children are older he'll go off back to the woods, the backwoods in western Washington State again.
yeah, maybe.
Yeah,
Yeah. I guess I noticed this time it kind of felt a bit more open ended to me, the ending,
interesting.
rather than just being a nice pat, cut and dry sort of happy ending. They all lived happily ever after. I
Uh,
think there was a hint, a very subtle hints in there that maybe not quite, but it's a very satisfying ending, and it's very,
yeah,
I think it's about that compromise in the end that sort of will hopefully mean that they'll get on and move
yeah,
on in a positive direction.
definitely.
So yeah, I love this film. I think it's
It is.
terrific, and
One of the
um,
lines that I think sort of important. One of its messages is what his sister says. We're all doing the best we can, and I think that's sort of because despite his
mm,
very lofty sort of ethical position, um, that is sort of the part of the sort of message of it as well. That people are sort of by and large doing the best they can. It's just where they are, they're situated that makes that maybe difficult.
yeah, yeah, absolutely, and I think that's true. Yeah,
Yeah,
um, and that's definitely something that's worth bearing in mind
yeah,
as well.
yeah.
That Yeah, it's okay. Is there any last sort of things that I'm conscious of the time now that we
No,
can
two terrific
wrap up?
movies. Watch them both.
When we were talking about doing this particular episode, we sort of were back and forth about a few different films. Were there any other sort of honorable mentions that you maybe wanted to drop in there about sort of dropout films?
Hey, film nerds. Yes, I'll come back to it. Have you got any?
Well, I was just going to mention one that I recently, a first time watch for me. I saw a film called Conversation Piece, which is a Luchino Visconti
Oh
film,
yeah,
which I thought it kind of sort of has tenuous connections to Captain Fantastic in the sense that it's about someone is an older man played by Burt Lancaster who has withdrawn from society. He's a retired kind of college professor,
right,
and he lives in this very luxurious building with lots of beautiful paintings and books. And he just spends all his time sitting and reading and listening to records, and just he's kind of withdrawn to a large extent
right,
from society in his sort of twilight years, but then what he's suddenly thrust into this situation where this family sort of imposes themselves on his seclusion and on his life, and how he sort of slowly gets drawn in to their world and the sort of the implications that it has.
Yeah.
So I saw a few sort of parallels and things with Captain Fantastic in that film. And I think that's a really good film that people should look out. There's actually a reissue coming from Raro Video in the United States on Blu-ray. They've restored the film and they're re-releasing it. I've got the Masters of Cinema
Yeah.
version, and it was one of these films that had been sitting on my shelf, still in the shrink wrap, for a long, long time. And I finally said, "Oh, I'm going to check that one
Yeah.
out." I absolutely loved it. I thought it was a really interesting film, and Burt Lancaster is really wonderful in it, as is everyone actually.
Yeah.
And it's a really good film that I would recommend people check out. That is, again, a little bit about someone who's withdrawn, dropped out, if you will, from society a little bit, and how he's kind of pulled back into that, and the kind of the conflicts and the sort of the drama that comes out of that.
Yeah.
So it's quite an interesting piece. And I'd also give an honorable mention, if you wanted something a little bit more on the funny side of it for a dropout film, a more satirical one. There's a film by Albert Brooks called Lost in America. And that film is absolutely brilliant comedy about a really sort of affluent couple who decide to chuck everything away and buy a motorhome and
I saw
drive
it when it came
across.
out, I think, or the
Yeah. But it's such a funny film, and very, very amusing. And it sort of has, as I said, a more satirical take on the dropping out sort of, that dynamic. So it's a really good film, Lost in America, it's called, from the 80s. And it's a very, very funny film. As Albert Brooks in that period, he made
yeah.
several really, really very funny uh, films,
Right.
kind of satirizing kind of contemporary life at the time.
Okay.
So
Interesting.
I definitely recommend that if you want more of a funny take on the dropout
Right.
sort of scenario. So there was one you were
All
going
right.
to
Now let's
mention too,
talk
John.
about well, there's a Outcast of the Islands, which is a sort of film directed
Yeah,
by Carol Reed, actually, with Trevor Howard in it,
yeah,
and
yeah. The great Trevor Howard.
great Trevor Howard, exactly. And it's based on
Yeah.
Ulysses Conrad novel, but it's sort of based on desert. I'm thinking more sort of desert island type things, uh,
Mm,
and the other thing I was thinking about is like somebody who gets in too deep is like in Castaway is sort of Grizzly Man. And I think
mm,
Roeg and Werner Herzog had sort of similar views of nature, that it wasn't entirely benign,
yeah.
and
Yes.
humans could
No.
find themselves in deep water if they weren't careful. And
Yeah, Grizzly Man is a great film. That, yeah, you're right. That is a brilliant film that fits in with this scene, because that's someone who did definitely tried to withdraw himself from society and go live out in the wilderness with the bears.
yeah,
And that's a terrific story. And Werner Herzog, very masterfully uses all that found footage of this man and his life around that period, and crafts a very, very moving and fascinating film. So yeah,
yeah,
that's a great one. Yeah, I didn't think of that one, but that's a terrific one.
yeah. I guess those two
Yeah,
main
that
ones.
fits in.
And yeah, so uh, those are my.
And I love Outcast of the Island as well. That is a great favorite of mine. And I love Trevor Howard. I think he was one of the sort of, people don't talk about him
Uh,
much nowadays, but he's absolutely fantastic actor. And that is a really great Carol Reed film, Outcast of the Islands. I love that one.
yes, yes,
So
beautiful looking as well.
yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Great. Well, so folks, you got lots to dig in there to get into and watch before our next episode
Yeah,
hits. So you've got, like, well, we've sort of mentioned about 7 films there for you to check out. So get busy, and then come back and join us next time, because we've got some cool guests that we're lining up. We've been talking to a couple of people about coming in and joining the show, so we're going to work that out, and hopefully next time they'll be dropping in, but if not, it'll be in the next couple of episodes. And in the meantime, folks, enjoy yourselves and take care. And thanks for joining us. If you can think of any great dropout films that you wanted to share with us and the other listeners, by all means, drop us a line or leave a comment on the show. And we'd love to hear from you. And we will see you next time on the Film Swap Podcast.
Goodbye. Thanks for listening to the Film Swap Podcast. If you like this podcast, please consider giving the show a rating or leaving a review. This helps other listeners find the show. Binge-worthy and better with time, our past episodes are packed with deep dives, hot takes and fascinating themes. Whether you're a long-time listener or just jumping in, there's a topic and a classic film to suit any taste. Explore the Film Swap back catalogue today. Learn more at filmswap.uk.
Tinsel and spun candy and thrills.
Oh, that's the things these nerdy middle-aged men get up to.